Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I've always been a bit of a shut-in. Even back then as a kid, I remember I decided one New Year's Eve that I would have my own little party. I remember decorating the house in streamers, blowing up a few balloons, doing all the stuff a good party host would do. Honestly, I was going overboard, probably to impress my parents. I was 13 and just beginning to get left home alone. It was an exciting time and the most grown-up thing I had ever felt. I decided I needed some streamers and more stuff hanging from the walls and ceiling. I pulled out a step stool and a roll of tape to set it all up. The house we lived in at the time was really old, so the walls were exposed wooden boards. I had to use extra tape to get anything to stick to that grimy, dusty old wood. Attaching the end of each streamer was a bit of a chore. Whatever. I just doubled up on how much I used and reached extra high to get more surface area. I reached up to tape one of the last decorations when I slipped and the stool fell out from underneath me. My hands crashed into the wall to brace myself. Only one of the boards had this old nail poking out of it. The nail punctured my hand and went right into the bone, completely burying itself inside my wrist. There's no other way to explain it, other than it wedged itself inside my joint. My feet couldn't touch the ground. I looked down and realized I was suspended in the air. Obviously, I went into physical shock, but the pain in my wrist was blinding. I couldn't ignore it, but I also couldn't react to it either. There was no one home, and no one would be home for at least a few more hours. Blood began to run freely down my arm and dripped down my elbow. I remember distinctly wondering if maybe this is what it felt like to be crucified. Soon after, I started to shake. I only learned that later, though. I was going into convulsions that were so bad my teeth were rattling together. This forced my body to move a bit, which gave me the momentum I needed. The nail slid out of my wrist and I fell to the floor, blood freely pooling still. Needless to say, I did not bother to continue with the decorating. I pulled myself into a ball in a puddle of my own blood on the floor and began to cry like I never had before. The adrenaline wore off and the shock and pain really got a hold of me. All I can really remember is the pain. Nothing has, or probably ever will, come close to what that felt like, that nail between my bones. My parents got home just a little after midnight and found me collapsed in the same place. This was well before cell phones, so they had to rush me to the hospital. The doctors and nurses were shocked that I hadn't done more damage to myself. Thankfully, I healed up just fine in the end, but I still have nightmares about that awful day. I've always been someone who loved the outdoors. Even as a kid growing up in a small city, my parents would often have to yell my name from the porch to get me to come in at night. I grew up when the internet was still a relatively new thing, and you had to use dial-up to get connected. Some of you can probably remember the sound just by me mentioning it. The story I'm about to share takes place about 10 or 11 years ago. I was with my girlfriend at the time, who I met in college. It was a serious relationship, but it was an on and off again kind of thing. In all honesty, it was full of childish drama, mostly because I was super immature back then. At some point, we made plans to attend a local fair or carnival with some family and friends. We had a decently sized group, so we decided that everyone would drive separately. That way, we'd have several cars, and people could leave whenever they wanted. I'm usually not a drinker. Even during college, alcohol always gave me really bad anxiety the following day, so I typically avoided it. For whatever reason, though, this particular night I was in a good mood and actually felt like drinking. I ended up having several drinks with my girlfriend's dad. We were giving each other the old, "Hey, how long is it going to take you to finish that?" or "This is already my second drink, and you're still on your first." That kind of thing. After maybe the third or fourth drink, my girlfriend came up in front of everyone and said something like, "Are you gonna slow down? I think you need to relax." I honestly don't remember the exact words. I do remember acting poorly, basically pouting because I was annoyed and embarrassed she'd said that in front of everyone. I shut down, gave one-word answers, and was rude and antisocial. My girlfriend even came up to me with a beer to apologize. I declined and kept giving her the cold shoulder. Looking back now, it seems so dumb. I don't know why I was so mad or why I reacted that way. After walking around the fair for about an hour, I said I was going to take off and head home. Since I'd been drinking and couldn't drive, my girlfriend asked how exactly I planned to get home. I lied and said a friend was coming to get me, then just walked off. Behind the parking lot area was a forest, and beyond that I believed there were a bunch of farms or something. It was still a bit light out, so I figured I'd walk into the woods to clear my mind and get out of the crappy mood I was in. At first, I assumed it would be a quick walk, but I started to get extremely hot. I don't know if it was because I was buzzed or if it was just the heat. All I know is, the longer I trampled around out there, the more embarrassed I became about my actions. I started to realize how I had acted and figured I should head back to see if everyone was still at the fair. After walking for about 20 minutes, though, I realized I had no idea where I was. I was completely lost. I couldn't find a path back out. I tried to analyze my surroundings and move toward a sound I thought I heard, but I realized I didn't even know what it was. Where was I going? I was stuck in the middle of the woods with no one around. I pulled out my phone. Even though I had a bunch of texts, nothing would send or go through, no service. After sitting on the dirt for several minutes thinking, I decided the best thing to do was wait until nightfall. I didn't want to go deeper into the woods, not knowing where I was. I figured eventually I'd be able to see the lights from the fair and make my way back. Then I'd get service and could call for a ride. As the sun began to set and dusk settled in, I became more uneasy. I started to notice every little sound, a branch breaking, the wind shaking the trees. As it got darker and darker, I swore I heard voices. I kept twisting my neck, sure I was hearing someone, and that the voices were getting closer. Then came an eerie silence. Suddenly, someone yelled, "There you are! Get him!" My heart just about jumped out of my chest. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran blindly. I was bumping into trees, getting smacked in the face by branches. I tripped once, then again. On the second fall, I stayed down. I remained as still and quiet as I could, trying to see if I had gotten away from whoever was yelling. Why were they looking for me? Was I being paranoid? How would anyone even know I was in the woods? After a few minutes of silence, I heard footsteps crunching over leaves and branches. I could hear people talking. The only thing I remember clearly was someone saying, "Expects us to get him," or something along those lines. Once I heard their voices trail off in another direction, I slowly began to move again. By now it was pitch dark, and I still couldn't see any lights. After what felt like 10 minutes of walking, I finally saw a glow in the distance. As I got closer, I could hear the familiar sounds of life. I realized it was the fair. I sprinted toward it. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. I've always looked back on that experience wondering who those people were. Were they actually looking for me, or was it just some coincidence? Maybe it was someone just messing around. I don't know. Whatever it was, ever since that night, whenever I'm out hiking or in the woods, I always feel like I see something in my peripherals, even when I know there's nothing there. And now, I always make sure I'm home before dark. Because my parents had separated before I was born, I spent my time growing up between each of their houses. Each summer we would swap. Until I turned 19, I stayed with my dad in rural Missouri. He had grown up in the area himself and most of his family still lived there. There was not much to do, like going to movies and stuff like that. Instead, I would fill my days hanging out with my older cousin and getting into a fair amount of mischief. Many of our long summer days were spent wandering the surrounding woods. On one of these journeys, we came across this gigantic lake, quietly by itself, right out in the middle of nowhere. The water was crystal clear and filled with tons of almost monstrous fish. We asked the adults if they had been aware of its existence, but no one had heard of it. That was probably the reason it had so many large fish living in it. No one in the area had fished it at all, and anyone who had in the past must have allowed its location to be lost to time. We would fish that lake 3 or 4 times, coming away with a stringer full of lunkers on each occasion. On the 5th trip, we were hoping to catch enough for a big family fish fry. The summer holidays were starting to wind down a bit, and we figured a nice fish fry would be a great way to cap it off. It was a warm Saturday morning when we headed out. We started about an hour before sunup. The walk-in took well over an hour. Besides, the fish would stop biting by the hottest part of the day. We hoped to get back to my dad's house by early afternoon. The beautiful sight of the pond came into view around dawn. It didn't take long for us to grab our first bites, and for the next 3 hours, the fish came in quickly, one after another. Our limit had been caught and I was raring to get heading back. We had a 90-minute walk with 2 5-gallon buckets packed to the brim with giant fish. I imagined another 30 could be added to that trek easily. Much to my displeasure, my cousin thought it would be refreshing to take a dip in the lake before we left, so he tried to pressure me into joining him. Thing is, I didn't know how to swim at the time. All I wanted to do was get back. He was older than me, so he was in charge. I plopped my tail onto a rock and waited while he did his thing. There was this old rope tied to a tree nearby, probably from 100 years ago or something. He really wanted to swing from it and jump in. It looked unsafe to me. However, my concerns were laughed off trivially. He stripped down to his boxers, setting his clothes on the ground next to me. He climbed the tree and grabbed the rope. Pushing off, he swung out just a short distance before the rope snapped right above him. He'd made it out far enough to hit the deep water, but probably not as far as he'd intended. When he impacted, his body made this dull thudding sound. It certainly didn't sound normal. Likely, it hurt a lot. I was planning on laughing at him and saying, "Haha, I told you so." As the moments passed by, though, he never resurfaced. The situation was becoming quite scary. I looked around to see if he'd come up somewhere farther away, perhaps floating unconscious because of the hard contact with the water. Still, I didn't see him anywhere. I began to panic and waded as far out as I dared, looking through the water for him. Unfortunately, the water became cloudy with every step I took and made it impossible to see. It became clear to me that he must have drowned. I had no idea what to do. Perhaps, if I could have swum back then, I may have been able to help him, but it was too late. Now I couldn't do anything but pack up and head home. During the entire walk back, a small nugget of hope lingered in the back of my mind. Maybe he had tricked me and would pop up at some point. That didn't happen. However, the dread I carried of telling my family grew with each step I took. I tried several times to find the words, but with each attempt, I would just break down and choke on my tears. Ultimately, I could only manage to say that Mark had drowned. They got the point after that, and once I was able to pull myself together, I led my dad and uncle back to the pond. Mark's body was still nowhere to be found. With no other options, we went to the sheriff's office to report the incident. When I realized where we were headed, I started freaking out. In my young mind, I thought I was going to be blamed for my cousin's death. It took a while, but they were eventually able to convince me I was not in trouble. Even after they had, though, I couldn't help but feel guilty every time I looked at my uncle. Regardless of what he said, I didn't believe that he didn't blame me. I explained everything that happened to the sheriff, and the search began the next morning. Just by chance, that was the day I was going back to my mom's. That Monday night, my mom sat me down and told me that a team of divers had discovered Mark's body earlier that day. They discovered that one of his feet had gotten tangled up on a sunken log. That's why he had never been able to resurface. I wish I could say that made me feel better, but it didn't do anything to help at all. It did, however, serve as quite a catalyst to learn how to swim. The guilt of not being able to help my cousin stayed with me for most of my life. I never wanted to be in a position of not being able to help like that ever again. In a twisted way, his passing did have a positive impact on my life. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't prefer that he'd still be with us instead. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.